so part of why they think that might be that it's hard. It can be hard to get paid for doing the kind of creative writing that is closest to your heart. It's a lot easier to get paid if you want to go do content writing, if you want to go do, write journal articles or scientific writing, education writing, that sort of thing.
Welcome to the Speaking for Profit podcast. And I am excited about today's conversation with one of my amazing clients and someone I actually consider a dear friend, Lucinda Pepper. Today, we're going to talk about what does it mean to really be whole as an entrepreneur and as a business owner, and how do we do that with integrity? And I think that Lucinda, they have really carved out a place for themselves to not only lead with integrity, but to also lead with a easefulness and a patience that I really appreciate. So I know you all are going to get so much from this episode, and I'm just really thankful that you're spending your most valuable resource with us, which is your time. So thank you for being here. Kudos to you. If you like the podcast and you're enjoying and you're vibing to these amazing episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe, especially if you're watching us on YouTube. And if you are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere in the world where you're hearing our amazing voices, we also appreciate your love, your likes, and your reviews. So I'm going to bring Lucinda to the stage, and we're going to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship, wholeness, and really how to secure the bag with integrity. Hey, Lucinda.
Hey, Evolve.
How was that intro? How'd you like it?
I like it a lot. Thank you.
Okay. I was kind of going for like a smooth jazz kind of voice, a little bit calming. Lucinda, tell the audience a little bit about you in general. Like, what brings you joy? What are some things that are really exciting you in your life right now?
Great questions. One of the things that brings me the most joy is dancing. And yes. I have recently recommitted to a movement practice that includes walking, that includes stretching, a little bit of yoga, the yoga poses. And dancing is such a core part of that movement practice. I feel almost that's one of the places I can be most myself, is when I am letting go and letting the music shake me and guide me and take me into a place that feels very healing. It feels very joyful. It feels very present. And that's one of my happiest places. And that's something that's bringing me joy right now.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So when you get down, right? Because I call it a get down, right? When we're dancing, who's your favorite artist to listen to or to jam out to?
Oh man, I have such a wide range of musical joy. So what I'll say is before we sat down to have this conversation today, I put on a playlist that I call Words from the Deep Come Into Me, which is inspired by a Patty Griffin song. And one of the artists on there was Beyonce. And honestly, Beyonce is one of the, she's so fierce and so fabulous and so authentic and so willing to just be in her integrity and be in her, I want to say her self belonging on such a regular basis, like that. I think she inspires that in so many other people. So when that song came on towards the end of my prep time, I was just shaking it. I was like, all right, I'm going to get down with Beyonce.
I love that. I love the range, right, of a variety of artists. And I myself, I love that too. I'm not really a dancer, but I got a mean two-step. That's what I always tell people. Yes. But it all matters, right? Because it's really us building the vibe that's going to create space for us to be our most authentic selves. And I love that you brought up that about Beyonce in particular, because I think that we've kind of seen her grow as an artist. At one point, we can all say that maybe she wasn't who she is today, right? She didn't show us as much of herself. And I think that you're doing that even with your brand. So where are you from, Lucinda? Like, where'd you grow up? And how did you kind of start to get into the work of words? Because I feel like that's the work that you do as fellow writers, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what's your journey to getting to that?
I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I've lived in Minnesota my entire life. I've never moved away. I've bounced
Wow.
back and forth between the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul for most of my life. And I'm living in St. Paul today, and it's very interesting to be in a place where I have such long, deep roots.
Wow. I didn't even know you lived there your whole life, Lucinda. I had no idea. That's really cool. That's rare too, right? Like you don't hear people who
Yeah.
come from a place and live. And I mean you're moving around, but you're still in that same community.
Yeah, and there was a time I felt really bad about that. There was a time I had that word should in my head about how I should move away. I should get other experiences, be exposed to other cultures. And for a variety of reasons, it never worked for me to move away. I think there was a time in my 30s I would have, on a hot minute, moved over to the East Coast. And it just never worked out. And so here I am in my 40s, and I'm discovering how good it feels to have a base that feels really like home that I can travel from and return to.
Mm. I love that. Yeah, I feel the same way about California, even though I don't live there now. It always feels like a base. Like I'm always
Mhm.
in the back of my head. Like if anything ever happens, I know those streets like the back of my hand, right? Like I can navigate that place, which is really exciting. So you grew up there and when did you start to explore the writing side of yourself?
Yeah, I have to thank the St. Paul public school system and my early teachers, honestly, and my parents, who are both people for whom literacy is really important. And my dad, especially, he's a avid reader, and he's probably responsible for the reading love that I've had since I was a child. And
Mhm.
then early teachers have certainly supported that. And English and theater were always my favorite subjects. So just from a very early age, I can't even remember what particular age that I was when I picked up a pen and a little notebook and started a journal. Um, and I have been writing since. So I would guess somewhere before the age of 10.
Wow. So you are
Yeah,
OG in the game. Yeah.
I'm
You're
OG.
you're a real OG in the game. Yeah, I have a similar story in the sense of I always knew I wanted to write, so I would ask for, pens and paper and marker and artsy stuff for Christmas. But what I found out as I got older was that my grandmother wasn't very literate. So I
Hmm.
think that, at the time she grew up, her access to education was just different. I
Yep.
think they really instilled a sense of literacy in myself and my other cousins because of that lack of opportunity, right? Which is really,
Mm,
really cool. But it's so cool to see how it happens in our families and how some of it is just there and some of it is just like we're going to fill this gap and we're not going to, right, like have this happen again. So that's
right.
really cool that you started journaling. I am a fellow journaler. I was actually talking to my wife about this because I have a box of them and I
Yes.
need to figure out like where do these things go as I'm trying to build more of some minimalist habits in my life. But it's an attachment that I can always go back to,
Right.
that I think is really, really beautiful. So you've been a writer for a while, but as writers, especially if we're not performative, right? Like I come from a performance lane of writing, doing poetry, but never really like did slam and all that type of stuff. I thought that stuff was just too much. I always envy people who could do it because I just was like, I don't want to be competitive about the things that matter to me. Like this feels weird, right? But for
Yeah.
but for you, most of the work before we started working together, Lucinda, was really behind the scenes, right?
Hmm.
So can
Yep.
you tell the audience a little bit about like how you've used writing to secure the bag, right? Because I think sometimes people have this mindset that writers just do this for free, and I don't know why
Mm.
they think
Mhm.
that.
Well, it can be really challenging to make a career as a writer, and so part of why they think that might be that it's hard. It can be hard to get paid for doing the kind of creative writing that is closest to your heart. it's a lot easier to get paid if you want to go do content writing, if you want to go do, write journal articles or scientific writing, education writing, that sort of thing. But the kind of creative art writing that is full of emotion. We just live in a culture that doesn't prize that kind of openness, that kind of vulnerability. And part of my work as a writer, as I put my words out there, is to disrupt this culture. It's to disrupt the narrative that our writing has to be something that, like you said, it doesn't actually have to be performative. What we put out there can be shared with and received by others in ways that don't include performativity, in ways that allow our authenticity to be really seen. So, I've used writing as a tool to secure client contracts, and writing jobs as a way to make money. And that's a really, it's always an interesting position for an artist to be in, because there's always a tug of war or a tension, right, around using this tool that we know is partly a channel for our soul and for our purpose to get out into the world, and is partly just a technical tool that actually can help us make a living and sustain ourselves, sustain our families, sustain our communities. So what I've found as I've done this work and explored getting paid for doing this work is that I'm dancing with that tension. I think maybe that's why I love dancing so much. It does come up as a metaphor for me in a lot of other parts of my life, but I find that I dance with that tension. I dance with that experience of putting my authentic self out there and accepting that sometimes in order to achieve my goals, I have to tap into that more technical side of the writing. I have to tap into the side that I know will turn around and pay me.
Yeah. Ooh, the tension, or as you said, the dance, right? Which dances can be a little bit of tension there as well. Well, you do it with grace. I tell you that, Lucinda, right? Like, and I know the work that you've been able to do with your clients has been transformative, not just because of your technical skills, but because of who you are as a person, the way you show up in the work. And that's so much connected to being an artist, right? So yeah. I definitely think it's beautiful. So for you, what are your favorite type of clients to work with? Like, right. Like and you don't have to name the organizations, but what qualities do they hold? And what clients can be a little bit challenging? Because I'm sure some of the listeners, right, are thinking to themselves, right, like, I'm a writer, I could do this, but I always want to give them more of a realistic feel of how people experience their work.
I love this question. My favorite clients are clients who are on the edge of a transformative change. Because one of the crucial things I've come to learn about myself and my work is that I'm a catalytic worker. I'm a catalyst for change, and I help people who are navigating change to navigate it in a way that doesn't conform. Like I said, I'm a disruptor for dominant systems. And so I help people navigate change in a way that pulls away the layers that get in the way of their authenticity, that get in the way of their belonging to themselves, that get in the way, the layers that include things like violence. And I know violence is a big word, but I believe that violence is a spectrum. And some of the violences are real little. We don't even think of them as violence, but they get in the way of our transformation. So my favorite clients to work with are people, groups, and organizations that are in transition, that are just waiting for somebody to come along and help them make that transition, but make it even more real, even more solid, even more grounded than they felt like they could do on their own.
And you get to be almost like a doula, right? Of
Yes.
that change and that experience, which I imagine is beautiful. I think
Yeah.
sometimes what I appreciate about what you said is a lot of times people list the qualities of a client showing up in a particular way, which
Mm.
for me, I think puts a lot of pressure on that client. But for
Mhm.
you, it's more about not them showing up in a particular way or having like the checks offs, but being at a moment where you can really help them get over a leap, right? Or make it to that transformative part of their business and a part of their life. So
That's
that's
right.
really cool. Who don't you like though, Lucinda? Because I know you're nice
Right.
sometimes, but
I can be nice.
there's some clients out there. I'm thinking about one
Uh-huh.
of them right now for myself, and it just, people that make you itch, right? It's like, oh, I don't work with nobody like that ever again. Who are
No.
those people?
I appreciate that question too. People who make me itch, what a great question, or cringe a little bit, are people who are just completely unwilling to get out of the perspective that they're in. They're stuck in a perspective, they're stuck in a mindset, they're stuck in a set of practices, and they really believe that they're doing the right thing, and they just won't hear that there are options, possibilities, choices. That can be really challenging to work with. And I can be a little bit of a stubborn person. So, when people have like staring contests, right? Like, I'll go as long as I can. So metaphorically in the client relationship, like, I can be stubborn. I can sit there with you in your stuff for a long, long time, but only if I'm seeing at least tiny shifts. Like, if you're going to just sit there and say that you don't need to change, I can't help you. I'm not here for that. So people who I really struggle to work with people who are unwilling to take chances, unwilling to make tiny shifts or bigger shifts, and unwilling to believe in possibility, that there could be a different way that things can go.
Yeah. Get rid of the negative Nancy's, in other words.
Yeah, and I want to be really clear about this. Like, I am not talking about toxic positivity. Like, there are some folks out there who are all like, no, it has to be happy. It has to be, and I'm actually, some of my strengths are working with people who are in grief. So another one of my strengths is working with people who are exploring their shadow places, those places that we don't like to look at, that we're like, I don't want to see that, who are the parts of ourselves that we're a little bit afraid of. Those places are so interesting to explore. And oftentimes when people are stuck, that's where the power is. That's where the magic is, where they're going to be able to move past and transform. I definitely like optimism, and I think optimism is great, but it has a place. I think what's more powerful and more important to me is when we can engage in active love practices that allow us to make those shifts. Then what happens is we develop hope. And hope is so much more powerful than toxic positivity. With hope and active love practices, you can achieve things in your life you never would have been able to if all you did was focus on feeling good, feeling happy, and keeping things kind of up here at the status quo.
That goes back to that system of being performative, right? Because it's not really who you are. It's not how you feel. Attention public speakers, coaches, and consultants. Ever dreamt of booking 5-figure speaking and consulting contracts? In just 5 days, I'm teaching my tried and tested system to elevate your speaking and consulting business. Forget the cold emails, bypass the salesy pitches. This challenge is about building genuine high-value connections. And here's a promise I have for you. With a commitment of just 1 to 2 hours a day for 5 days, you're going to witness transformative results. On day 1, you'll learn how to craft a business strategy without cold emails or paying to speak. Day 2 is all about you redefining your profile to attract decision makers ready to invest in your expertise. By day 3, you'll have your very own 5-figure sales system to turn contacts into clients. By day 4, we will have you automating your funnel with proven templates and scripts. And day 5, I'm going to teach you how to master the art of discovery calls with a step-by-step checklist and exclusive 5-figure sales secrets. Whether you're just stepping onto the speaking scene or you're a seasoned pro, this challenge is tailor made for you. I'm going to teach you the exact strategies that have helped me help my clients make over $2 million in the last 2 years. The journey to a thriving 5-figure speaking and consulting business begins with this challenge. So are you ready to redefine your limits, accelerate your growth, and bask in the limelight of your success? I want you to join the 5 Days to 5-Figure Speaking Challenge now. Let's rewrite your success story together. Simply head over to speakingforprofit.com. You're going to click that button that says 5 Days to 5-Figure Speaking Gigs so you can get started with the challenge. Can't wait to see you there. All right. Now back to the show. So thanks for sharing that tea with me, Lucinda, because I know, it's not always easy for us consultants to talk about, the people we don't like working with. But I think it's important as we grow our businesses because we want to put things out there that compel the people we want to work with and repel anyone who's really not prepared for that, which is so important. So I think if I was to speak to, and I wrote this down, if I was to speak to Speaking for Profit members, they would say that you are probably one of the most patient, probably one of the most nicest, and humble in a way that you don't need to be people within the group, right? Sometimes I have to audience, right? We're going to be a little macro here. I have to tell Lucinda, like, show these people who's boss, like tell them the Carfax of who you are, right? But you're doing so much better at that. And it's amazing to see your growth. And being on this journey with you as your coach, what's been really cool, Lucinda, I don't think I've ever told you this, is to see you reclaim your time and energy. Like you have not accepted, contracts or opportunities that don't feel aligned. And that takes a lot of patience. There are people who are out here securing bags that are holding them down. That's what I like to say, right? Like you securing a bag, but it's literally holding you down. And I think that you've been doing that because you've been having this rebrand. So my question for you is like, this is a reflection of what I see and what I think community sees. What do you see in the Speaking for Profit community that has kind of like kept you excited, kept you motivated? And what would you share with anyone who's interested in joining us down this journey of monetizing our expertise?
I love this. Thank you for asking. And thanks for the reflections, Coach. That is really powerful to hear about myself. I appreciate it. I one of my favorite things about the Speaking for Profit community and my Speaking for Profit fam is there's so much enthusiasm and energy when we get on calls, and it's not selfish enthusiasm and energy. It's not just me. It is outwardly directed. We're enthusiastic for each other's businesses. We're really seeing each other grow and seeing each other change and become more confident and seeing each other have success by applying the Speaking for Profit methodology and curriculum. And we're really in it for each other. Like I have expressed on our group calls how important this community has been. It's been a place where I decided from the get-go that I was just going to show up where I'm at on my journey, even if it's at a different pace than other folks who are moving, maybe moving a little faster towards securing those bags. You're absolutely right. I decided, I made a commitment to myself when I started this business in October of 2021 that I would never again, I was like, why am I an entrepreneur if I'm going to take work because of that mentality of scarcity and the mentality that I just have to have something, And so obviously that's a very complicated scenario because we all got to have money to make our bills, right? We all got to have a budget getting fulfilled with cash so that we can meet our monthly and annual expenses. And at the same time, you can have an abundant mindset even if you're still putting the pieces together and figuring out how to make it work. So that abundant mindset is one of my other favorite things of the Speaking for Profit community. It is clear that we all are working to affirm abundance in our lives in lots of different ways. And that's infectious, right? In a good way. It's the kind of that enthusiasm and mindset is what's keeping me believing in myself, even on the days that are hard. Like I had one earlier this week where I was like, man, this is, sometimes being an entrepreneur is such a grind. And it is, sometimes I have that feeling of my wheels spinning and not getting a lot of traction. And then I logged onto a group call that night and I was lifted. And I was lifted by the community at Speaking for Profit.
Thank you for sharing that. It's beautiful to see the community grow, especially as someone who started this like in isolation and didn't really have a lot of support. So I lean on a lot of y'all, for just how do I want to do this work? How do I want to like support the work that we're doing? And also for your feedback on just like what you're seeing in the marketplace, which I think is so helpful. Like sometimes I'm on our calls and I'm like, people are really missing out on things that are going to help them save 5 to 10 years of their life and their business. And it's so exciting to see people secure the bag. But I think what's even more exciting is the transformations that happen when people feel supported about doing what they said they were going to do. There's something about the accountability side of it. And I think people look at accountability, Lucinda, as I told you, you say you were going to do it and I held you accountable, like this parenting thing. But I think what happens within group coaching, specifically Speaking for Profit, I'm not in a lot of programs, I'm not that person. But I think what happens there is there's a sense of accountability for us showing up for ourselves as the new version of ourselves, right? The version of ourselves that doesn't take abuse from an employee or employer, that from an organization, period. A version of ourselves that doesn't accept this low of pay. Yes. And that's hard to do when you're by yourself. So if anything, I love that you bring that to the group as well and that others reflect that back to you. And I know you've got some things you're building with some folks in the background and we're building our own economy, right? So we can turn to people, make money and be able to secure the bag. So I was on your website and let me bring it back up because I want to use the right language. And you listed here that the work that you do is trauma-informed communication practices. And I thought that was so important because often when we're thinking about trauma-informed care or work in general, it's not connected to communication, but it is. And I don't think I've ever seen anyone lay that out. So I wanted to know if you could explore more with us of what does that look like and how do you help organizations and businesses really implement that into their work?
Yeah, I think that I'd like to start answering your question by telling a very brief story. I was once at a conference, and there was a segment of the conference that was set aside to be wellness practices. And this person who was up on that stage, who had secured that bag, right, and who was being paid to speak to this conference of a few thousand people, they had an amazing story. Amazing. They had overcome significant health-related challenges from childhood to adulthood, and they weren't expected to live, and they actually did. They surpassed all their doctors' expectations. And were out there sharing their tips with us about how we can focus on our wellness. As they were speaking, they spoke so fast. And when you speak too fast on a stage or on any platform, people already, when taking in audible communication, hearing people taking in audible communication, you're already kind of missing part of it. So it's important for speakers to slow down and allow their point to be heard. In addition, there was an ASL interpreter on the stage who was struggling to keep up with the speaker because of how fast they were speaking. So that reduced the accessibility for folks in the audience who were using ASL for communication because of being deaf or hard of hearing. And then as the speaker went on and they were telling this very, kind of engaging life story, and then they were jumping into these tips about wellness, it became very clear to me right away that their framework for wellness included a fairly small number of people who had a particular type of ability in their bodies, people who had a particular type of ability to make decisions, a particular, maybe they had a little bit more range in mental health because they understood the mental health struggle that goes along with having physical challenges. But they also really just kind of set up this idea that you need to be this particular person and fit in this particular box in order to access wellness. So that in itself is limiting, and it's going to cause so many people in your audience to just tune out. So if that person had been using a trauma-informed communication, they might have chosen to use neutral pronouns like they, them, instead of she or he. They might have chosen to acknowledge how the dominant culture, the class system, our medical industrial complex, and the many other challenging systems we have in the US impact wellness, and done that in a way that gave information without giving explicit examples that were triggering for people in the audience. And then the final thing I'll say, just to answer your question, is that at the end of this person's kind of lecture part of their speech, where they talked about the tips, they decided to share one more personal story. And it was a story about their love of rescuing animals. And they shared without any content warning or any kind of preparation for us in the audience. They shared pictures of these animals in the home of somebody who had been keeping too many of them. So the animals were in cages and emaciated and really just in very bad shape. And it's so heartbreaking to see that. And it can also be extremely triggering for people in the audience for a whole variety of different reasons. And when it comes down to it, you don't need to know why people in your audience will be triggered. You just need to understand that there are ways to get your message across and communicate effectively with the kind of conscious and inclusive language that allows people in the room to be brought in to your story without excluding them, and that allows people to have access to your story without, limiting that access. So that's why I use trauma-informed communication, and why I can teach it to other people. I've just been in too many situations like that, both interpersonal, like one-on-one, or in group settings where the communication and the facilitation is not trauma-informed, and I've ended up feeling excluded, hurt, harmed, or worse. And that just doesn't need to happen.
Wow. Y'all, I hope y'all had y'all notebooks out, because Lucinda over here dropping gems on everybody, right? And I'm excited because we're going to be bringing this particular presentation, facilitation style and concept to Speaking for Profit. And, you and I had a call offline, and I think that this is going to be a great way to make sure that the folks who are going through the university are leading with this intention of trauma-informed communication, but also over-delivering. Because what you mentioned, Lucinda, it is a rarity. And there's so many conferences, big events that I've been to. I mean, big stages where people don't think about this, right? And literally will traumatize a whole group, and then the whole event has shifted. The energy of, right? Like it's something that you can't come back from. And
Right.
Sometimes what's interesting is organizations consider that powerful. Oh, the audience was crying. Oh, they were in an uproar. That was a powerful speech. And it's like, that's not powerful. That's actually an inappropriate way of doing it. So for the teaching and training style of it, I don't want you to give away the whole workshop, because we keeping this in-house, right? So for folks who are watching this, y'all get a couple of tips, but Lucinda's going to be doing this with our community. what are ways that people can start to do this today, right? Because I'm big on, if people are listening to this podcast and they're not able to be in Speaking for Profit, great. I want them to get some tips and tools that they can actually utilize today if they got a speaking engagement tomorrow. So maybe one or two tips you would give folks who are trying to implement that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one, like I just mentioned, so I'm somebody who identifies as non-binary, and the they them pronoun is the neutral pronoun. It's the alternative to using he or she to describe somebody when you're talking about them in the third person. And the they them pronoun has been around for a long, long time. You can find some pretty fascinating histories about they, them as a pronoun online. And it has been used to mean kind of that third gender, that space of gender that doesn't assign a sex to somebody, that's according to the binary classification of sex and gender. And so that's one of my first tips. If you're going to tell a story, it's a great way to keep details confidential about the subject of your story if you use the they, them pronoun. If you're going to point out somebody in the audience for audience engagement, obviously there's no way you could know how that person identifies. So if you just use the they, them pronoun, if you say, hey, I'd like to, speak to that person in blue over there, and maybe 3 people in blue raise their arms, and you're like, no, you over there, next to them in the pink shirt. You can do that, and it's a way to reduce, violence. And I'm just going to call that what it is. A lot of people might call that like microaggressions or, cognitive bias. But what it comes down to is that's a form of violence. So we can use neutral pronouns. That's a great way. One other tip I'll give people is anytime you're going to talk about a sensitive topic that involves some form of violence, and, no doubt, personal stories are incredibly powerful and can move the needle on cultural and social issues and can help people transform. But whenever you're going to talk about a sensitive issue, especially one that has explicit mentions of violence or depictions of violence, give your audience multiple fair warnings. So give them kind of a cue, maybe 2 minutes ahead of time, give them another cue a minute ahead of time, maybe 10 seconds ahead of time, say, I'm about to share a photo. What that does is it gives people an opportunity to turn away or close their eyes if they're using sight to see that photo. It gives people an opportunity to pause if say it's a person who doesn't have sight, a blind person who's using an audio describer to access the event, it gives them an opportunity to tap their audio describer and say, I don't want that description. It just allows for there to be space for choice for the people who are attending.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I learned a lot from you just there. I mean, even thinking about the trigger warning and the timing. I think sometimes as speakers, right, and we have that privilege, especially if you're not hard of hearing or deaf, it's like, oh, okay, I just say it, and then it transitions to you and you got it. But by giving it that time for all of those particular moments to make sure that people are consenting to that moment and not just like, pulling them in. So I love that. I love that so much, Lucinda. Thank you for the knowledge, and thanks for agreeing to come and speak on this, in the university. I think it's going to be really cool and a topic that you're probably going to do not just once, but a few times, because I could see people needing more and more support with this. Now, the other thing that you're really good at and that you've been really doing for yourself is coming together with this sense of wholeness as an entrepreneur. And I know for me, I'm constantly working on that. Like, how to be a better leader, how to be a better coach, but also how do I not get so lost in entrepreneurship where I forget my wholeness, my holistic self, my self-care, my well-being, going for a walk, hanging with my dogs, like the things that I dream of that are beyond work, even though my work is a pleasure, right? Like my life is beyond labor. So for you, when you mention this sense of wholeness and really like holding integrity, what does that look like for you? And what advice would you give for other entrepreneurs who are really trying to come from behind the scenes of doing the work? Like behind the scenes could be that you're a writer, But for me, it could also mean that you're an employee, right? And you've been working for another organization, and now you've got to actually put yourself out there. So any tips, and strategies that you would give folks?
Absolutely. One of the first is I'm going to bounce back to you and to speaking for profit and say one of the core tenets of speaking for profit that you learn right in the beginning is to make time for your VIPs. That the whole purpose of building a life and a career that is, what I call purpose work, is to also be sure that your life is included in that. Your VIPs are included in that. And that's been really helpful for me to remember. I'll also say that when you look at somebody who thinks that, when you look at somebody and you think, oh, they've got it all figured out. They look like they are making it all work. Remember that they're also a work in progress. I'm working on myself all the time. Every day, I'm trying to, figure out how do I make time for the work that needs to be done, the marketing, the business administration, the client outreach, the client sessions, and then how do I make time to cook and care for my family, care for my home? How do I make time to make art? How do I make time to stretch and move my body? It is constantly changing. There's not a formula, but what there can be is the intention and a really important core realization. So I'll start there. The really important core realization is that you're already whole. Nobody will ever be able to make you more whole than you already are. You were whole at the moment you were conceived. You were whole at the moment you were born. And regardless of the utter devastation and difficulty you might have experienced in your life, or just the hardness of the world we live in, it doesn't take away from your wholeness. As somebody who I'm a survivor of interpersonal, relational, and sexual violence, and I've had to work to understand that none of those things have ever broken me. They have hurt me, they have harmed me, they have left scars. I have had to do a lot of therapy. And underneath all of that, the wholeness has always been there. It's like a beautiful seed that never is diminished by what we go through. So that's the realization. And then the intention is intending to treat yourself as whole. Intend to come at yourself every day, remembering that you have needs in all these categories, that there's not a single day that you don't need to connect with another human being, because that's like core to our nature as humans. There's not a single day that you don't need food, water, sleep, and movement. Those are the basic things for psychological balance. There's not a single day that you don't need creativity. Even if you don't consider yourself a creative person, one outlet a lot of us use for our creativity is television. And no shame on that. I love watching TV shows. Lately, I'm working my way through RuPaul's Drag Race, and I'm feeling so much joy about RuPaul's existence in the world. And we need creativity. So even if you don't consider yourself a creative person, look at how you're incorporating creativity in your life and make sure you're getting a little bit of that every day. So even on days where you might be working a double shift, you might have caregiving duties, you might not have a lot of time, remember that this is not about creating a lifestyle where you add and pile on all these demands that take a lot of time. It's about creating the life that you want that supports your wholeness, which is intrinsic to you existing.
I felt that so much, Lucinda. When you said you are whole, I literally got butterflies. I was like, I needed to hear that. So thanks for doing the healing work with us on this podcast. That was just such a powerful way of looking at wholeness. And it just was a beautiful way of exploring it. And I appreciate you. So I know you got things to do, bills to pay, as they say, but I would love for you to share with the audience on ways that they can support your work and connect with you and any projects that you want to share with the group?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking that. So you can always check out my website, which is lucindapepper.com. And I do try to post information there about any projects I have coming up. You can also view my portfolio and opportunities to engage with me in my work. From October 2023 through March 2024, I'm teaching a monthly writing circle for queer and trans writers. Anybody who identifies as a writer and is on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, you can register and purchase those sessions on my website. You can follow me on Instagram, where I post a lot of my business content and my artistic content, and connect with me on LinkedIn. And on either of those platforms and on my website, I've got a free gift for anybody who wants to connect with me, who's listening to this podcast and wants to learn a little bit more about how they can do their own work. I have a guide that is the 10 ways to reclaim your self-belonging. And so if you want to find me on any one of those platforms, you'll be able to sign up to receive that guide. It's a beautiful 4-page guide that has some of my thoughts on how you can do some work in your own life to be sure you're really feeling that wholeness that is your birthright and belonging to yourself through active love practices.
That is beautiful, Lucinda. If you send us a link, we can go on and put that in the show notes as well, folks. So y'all can just look there if you're watching this, so that folks can have really easy access to reaching out to you and getting that free gift. And I love that you're doing these writing circles. I actually plan on attending them. I want to attend the one that you're doing in December when I have a little bit more free time, because I'm going to be starting writing my first entrepreneur book, which is called Bad Bosses. And it's going to be a book about leadership. And I just, I need a space to kind of explore that side of myself. It's been a while. So I'm really excited for your labor of love that you're giving us and to be a part of that community with you.
That's so exciting, Evolve. I can't wait to read your book.
I can't wait to read it too.
Right? Be so honored to hold that space and be in stewardship with you through that process.
I'm so excited about it. So, thank you so much for coming, Lucinda. I really appreciate you being here, supporting folks and understanding how to be whole and really talking about trauma-informed communication. If anything, I hope that folks got from this episode, there's ways to do the work with integrity, with love, and that there's someone who's leading it. So you don't have to start the process over, folks. You have a coach and a consultant that you can get to support you, and they're going to do it with the labor of love. So thank you so much, Lucinda, for being here. And until next time, y'all, peace.
Thank you so much, Evolve. I'm so happy to have done this with you today.
Me too.